Few more minutes waiting for everybody to connect. And we have reached 100 people who have already connected. So first of all, good afternoon. My name is Alexandre Bacon. I have the honor of facilitating these webinars that are a total of 5 webinars. This is our fourth of 5 webinars that will be held in the perspective of the Reconciliation Forum that will take place virtually this year, September 22nd and 23rd. So on behalf of the Université du Québec, Université Laval, but also on behalf of all the partners of this forum, it's a pleasure for us to welcome you to discuss another theme that is very important, of course, and that has to do with the best ways of leaving room for the First Peoples in teaching. We know that this is a topic that raised many debates, and I think there is still a lot left to be said with how we can do better with respect to teaching and the involvement of Indigenous people. So for our discussions here, your microphones, please keep those closed. If you want to share with the other attendees, we ask you to do so through the discussion window that you will find at the bottom of your screen here. And as usual, you have interpretation services. And so don't hesitate to use those. And so today, these services are offered at the bottom of your screen, so don't hesitate to use that, especially since today, for our 2 speakers, the first one will be speaking in English, so don't hesitate if you need to do so to use the simultaneous interpretation function. And as usual, this will be recorded. If you want to listen to this in the future, it will be available on the National Reconciliation Forum website. And finally, if you would like more details on today's meeting, you have a document, the participants guide that was sent to you at the same time as the Zoom link. So before going further, as usual, we always welcome an elder to introduce our meeting and guide our reflections for these webinars today. Normally, we would have had Mrs. Elizabeth Ashini, who was to do this opening, but our prayers accompany her, but she is accompanying her niece right now, who is very ill. They are going through very difficult times. And so Mrs. Édith Picard, that you also know, kindly accepted to replace her at the last minute today. So I would let her speak at this time. Madame Picard, the floor is yours. Way. Together, we are engaged in a path that will lead us to the forum. On a path where the environment changes, time can change as well as our state of mind. Today, we suggest that you make room for First Peoples. Making room means to welcome them, to make room for someone. This also involves confidence, growth, collaboration, sharing, so we can take our place. Nature seems to tell us over the past few weeks, you see, I took a dormant period, and now you can observe my regeneration. Nature is trust, is patience, is fulfillment. Much like a lookout on a path, on a pathway, to look at the sun going down, to hear the different birds singing. Let us welcome the environment that is proposed to us today, reflections, observations, comparable to the sun's rays and to the birds' songs. Let us give thanks to the Creator for the progression of this project for the forum. Have a good meeting, Samwink. Thank you very much, Madame Picard, for these introductory words today. This is very appreciated. And to leave room, as you mentioned, I think that we are right to think that this is an important pathway to follow. Possibly you have seen this, or you have been at the heart of the actions that were taken within the framework of the competency number 15, where we asked the government of Quebec, first of all, to implement recommendations in light of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, but also the national report for the inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Recommendations for which we would have integrated even more Indigenous content in the training curricula for the future professionals. So we can definitely think that taking our place, or fully taking our place in strategies and education for now and the years to come. The webinar, or the webinars, especially the bigger one, aims to go even further to encourage and enhance reconciliation in education, but also to identify solutions for action. The idea is not only to reflect, but it's to identify how we can concretely act in our environment, intervene in our environment for our organizations to be able to move forward more efficiently. And the webinars are also the opportunity to create an effect of mobilization within the organizations, whether they are public, governmental, First Nations, for the advancement of all of the issues related to Indigenous peoples and in education. Eventually, we all dream of a society that is exempt of all forms of discrimination and racism. And the solution, and of course, the pathway of education is certainly one that is very promising to that effect. The issue today is to try and be better equipped and eventually reflect how we can better equip future teachers, future professionals, so that they are in a better position to intervene with their clientele. Today, we have the honor of welcoming two speakers. First of all, Mrs. Nian Matoush, who is Director of Adult Education in the Cree, with the Cree School Board, and also Manon Tremblay, who is Head Director at Indigenous Department at Concordia University. Thank you to both our speakers for having accepted to share with us. Before we let Mrs. Matoush start her presentation, we would like to present chosen excerpts from our ambassadors. We have 11 ambassadors, 11 nations present on the territory here in Quebec. And we have chosen 11 ambassadors, and we asked them to reflect on issues related to Indigenous peoples and education. Very many of you over the last months were you mentioned this vast horizon that they represent. So let us once again listen to these video excerpts chosen, and then we will come back immediately with our two speakers, Mrs. Matoush and Mrs. Tremblay. So have a good visioning here.
This person is gonna have an advantage because it's their environment.
On priorisait nos travaux d'équipe aux réalités autochtones, mais on perdait des points parce que des fois, nous autres, c'est comme chez les Inuits, la transmission orale, c'est plus privilégié là, dans notre culture. Mais dans les travaux à l'université, il faut qu'on prouve scientifiquement les faits qu'on marque dans notre travail, puis on perd des points si on n'a pas les preuves. Mais pourtant, on le sait, nous autres, ça vient de nos grands-pères, de nos grands-mères, puis c'est des encyclopédies humaines, c'est quand même des savoirs qu'ils nous ont transmis. Mais ils ne prennent pas en considération la transmission orale dans leur correction de travaux.
On a de la difficulté à reconnaître les connaissances et leur savoir, également culturel. Donc, on est vraiment à un niveau académique dans lequel on sort la reconnaissance du culturel, alors que pour nous, les Autochtones, le culturel, c'est également ce qui est académique. Donc, on grandit avec cette partie de culture-là et on l'applique dans la vie de tous les jours. Ces connaissances-là sont extrêmement importantes, mais ne sont pas mis de l'avant.
Et on sait qu'avec l'histoire, les gens qui ont fréquenté les pensionnats ont eu l'interdiction de pratiquer leur langue, de parler leur langue entre eux, avec leur famille et tout ça, avec toute la notion qui était que la culture autochtone, finalement, elle était peut-être pas valable et on devait l'enrayer. Ma mère a été éduquée au pensionnat de cette façon-là. Donc, quand elle est venue me chercher, je parlais à Anishinaabe, à Ville-Saint-Laurent, Montréal, elle était un peu inquiète pour moi, je présume. Donc, de réflexe, elle me parlait toujours en français. Et de fil en aiguille, j'ai été inscrite à une école en français parce que Picogan n'avait pas d'école à cette époque-là, dans les années 70. Là. Fait que tranquillement, ma langue est assez vraiment amoindrie et j'ai même quasiment disparu, je dirais. Comme ma grand-mère ne parle que français aujourd'hui, puis on a de la misère, Anishinaabe et moi français, on a de la misère à communiquer ensemble, donc c'est un peu triste. Longtemps, moi, comme Première Nation, je me suis sentie coupable de ça. C'est comme si moi, j'avais pas entretenu ma langue. Et aujourd'hui, c'est sûr, je suis à l'âge adulte et je suis maman, donc je vois bien qu'il y a un bagage, il y a une responsabilité parentale, évidemment, mais aussi dans le système éducatif. Puis moi, je tiens pas ma mère responsable du tout pour ça parce que je comprends pourquoi on n'a pas pratiqué la langue Anishinaabe chez nous. Je sais qu'elle revenait de loin en sortant des pensionnats.
L'intervention psychosociale, là, on parle très peu de la réalité des Autochtones. Surtout des cours obligatoires, en fait, parce que tu peux prendre des cours optionnels. Puis là, des cours optionnels, oui, il y en a il y en a des cours qu'on parle comme les femmes autochtones du Québec et politique qui est en jeu. C'est un cours, mais c'est un cours hors programme. Fait que, c'est des cours optionnels, si tu veux, comme vraiment... mais on ne parle pas beaucoup dans le programme. Même chose en toxicomanie. En toxicomanie, oui, il y a certains cours qui en parlent, mais c'est comme très peu. C'est pas assez. Mais encore là, il y a aussi des cours optionnels qui offrent à l'Université de Montréal.
Ce qui est particulier par rapport aux Autochtones, c'est qu'en criminologie, on sait qu'il y a une surreprésentation carcérale des Autochtones dans le système. Et ça, c'est national, c'est aussi au Québec. Et tout le long de mes études, on ne m'a jamais mentionné cette information-là ou ce renseignement-là. Je m'en suis rendu compte par moi-même. J'ai débuté, puis je me suis rendu compte rapidement que à quiconque que je parlais, que ce soit étudiant ou professeur, il n'y a personne qui comprenait de quoi je parlais quand je parlais de surreprésentation des Autochtones. Le système carcéral, c'est un système hermétique. C'était pas quelque chose qui était comme connu à l'UQAM. Toute la culture autochtone, la règle à dû, tout ce qui pouvait comme aider à travailler la surreprésentation autochtone, c'était méconnu.
Basically, we were speaking of, social injustice and equality and democracy and all these things, but none of my professors ever spoke of Indigenous issues in Canada, and poverty, and colonialism, and cultural genocide, and all these things. It just was never a topic that we discussed. So it's very alienating as an Indigenous student in the university setting, because you feel it's like the elephant in the room. Obviously not for everyone, but for an Indigenous person it is. You're like, hello, how can we speak about Canadian history and geography and political science and economics and anything really? How can we speak about all these things and not even mention that there's people who live in Canada in third world conditions on their own land that was stolen just a few hundred years ago? Nobody speaks about this. But if I want to pass my exams, then I have to read this, I have to learn it, I have to memorize it, and in a way, I have to appreciate it. Because if I do my exams and I sound like someone who's scorned and someone who's angry and someone who's too activist, then I'll fail. So I have no choice but to conform.
And another thing is to stop assuming that all students learn one way, because as an Inuk who speaks Inuktitut as her first language, I've never done a multiple choice exam the way I did in Cégep and university, and those multiple choice exams can be tricky. The wording, simple wording, can really mess with your head, or like for a second language learner, it can be really difficult. And to take those things into consideration, that exam would be good for someone who grew up in Montreal, who went to school their whole lives there, and who speaks English as their first language, but not as an Inuk who's coming down to Montreal for the first time. And you expect them to do the exact same exam. It's not fair. It's not fair.
Mais sinon, c'est tout des travaux qu'on se fait donner, puis il y a comme des sujets déjà que le prof il nous donne comme des articles, puis ils disent bon ben choisissez l'article que vous voulez parler, puis ça va être ça votre travail de session. Mais en psychologie communautaire, j'ai eu l'avantage de pouvoir travailler un peu, de parler un petit peu de la réalité des Autochtones, qu'est-ce qui se passe dans les communautés autochtones.
There's the two ways of doing things. There's the Western way of doing things with research, theories, and how things should be, and then there's, you know, the knowledge that I grew up with, the worldview that I grew up with, that, you know, was there a way to bring these two together? And my supervisor said, yes, there is, you know, and encouraged me to go through with it, because he said there isn't enough of this. We need more of, you know, Indigenous people bringing their views and their thoughts, whatever it is, it's going to be useful in contributing to what we have.
Donc, en fouillant sur Internet, vraiment de façon curieuse, j'ai appris qu'il y avait un programme des facultés de médecine pour l'admission des Premières Nations et des Inuits du Québec, et que ça existait déjà ailleurs au Canada et que ça existait depuis 2008. Donc, j'ai décidé de tenter ma chance. Je me suis dit, pourquoi pas moi? Dans un cours où on voulait parler de la culture autochtone, moi j'ai parlé de quelqu'un de ma communauté qui est Nicole Obomsawin. On l'a invité et Nicole a fait un cours complètement différent. Moi, j'appelle ça faire de la pédagogie différente. Oui, elle a donné un cours sans PowerPoint, ce qui est assez une grande avancée quand on est à l'université. Et Nicole est venue parler de la culture. Et les gens se souviennent encore de ce contact-là, m'en parlent encore aujourd'hui après toutes ces années. Là, ça fait quand même quelques années maintenant. On peut parler d'un cours de la réalité dans le Nord, mais c'est jamais comme un contact de quelqu'un qui vient se livrer, se raconter de façon différente.
Dans les Premières Nations, on va valoriser beaucoup plus des modèles d'apprentissage circulaire, comme la relation entre les aînés et les enfants est super importante pour transmettre le savoir. Apprendre en observant, apprendre en écoutant, apprendre en faisant. Les trois ensemble, là, pas juste, pas séparés. Tout ça, le partage, l'imitation, tout ça, c'est des concepts qui sont dynamiques puis qui reposent sur plusieurs personnes. Alors que dans un modèle colonial éducatif traditionnel, c'est l'enseignant qui donne l'éducation, qui donne la vérité. Il n'y a pas d'échange là. Puis, si on veut se réconcilier l'éducation, donc on pourrait voir la réconciliation comme étant concilier deux façons de voir, concilier deux modèles, deux réalités.
So CUNA and Concordia, most of my professors were Indigenous. I think that's absolutely important to have Indigenous professors when they're discussing Indigenous topics. And I think it's also important because they understand the history and the, you know, intergenerational trauma that's happened within their own communities. And the courses really focused on Indigenous perspectives, which I think is extremely important.
If you can't find an Indigenous professor to teach your class, well, at least tell the professors to invite Indigenous people to come speak, you know? Have workshops, invite elders to come speak about their experiences, or just Indigenous students, or there's Indigenous scholars and writers from across the country who've written really, really good books on Canada's history of colonialism. Invite them to come speak in your classroom.
Puis, j'ai été amené à aller dans des cours, faire des conférences, parler un peu de nos droits, de notre réalité, puis qui qu'on est aussi. On faisait des fois des conférences, on le faisait dans la cafétéria ou l'auditorium, ce que les gens, tous les gens mangent. Donc, il y avait des gens qui étaient intéressés, qui venaient nous voir, mais tous les gens qui étaient plus loin, qui étaient assis à l'écart, qui ne venaient pas pour nous, tous ces gens-là qui ne connaissent pas, qui ne veulent pas entendre, entendaient. Ça, j'aimais ça beaucoup, beaucoup, beaucoup.
Il y a quelques cours qui, dans certaines universités, vont se donner dans la langue Innu, mais je pense que c'est quand même intéressant là, au niveau de l'histoire. Là, c'est pas quelque chose qui doit dater il y a très longtemps. Mais déjà, je trouve que c'est une très belle initiative. Donc là, on vient chercher le côté culturel et l'adapter au programme scolaire pour le donner aux Autochtones et aux Allochtones d'autant plus. Donc ça, c'est intéressant.
À l'université, durant les examens, ou ben, je sais pas, donner un peu plus de temps pour la compréhension dans le fond de la langue française pour nous, parce que des fois, il y a des mots que je comprends pas. Fait qu'il faut que je cherche dans le dictionnaire, ou ben, j'ai de la misère des fois à écrire, puis mon français, c'est pas... Il n'est pas vraiment bon, surtout au niveau écrit.
But, you know, I did my best with it, with the language. I went to all the teachers and each one of them, I said, you know what, I understand French. I can speak it somewhat well, but with writing, forget it, I can't. I'm not up to the level that the university will require. So may I please submit in English? Almost all of them said yes. There's only one that said no, you know, this is a French university and this is what you're going to have to do.
Programme, c'est une technique en travail social qui était faite pour les Autochtones. C'était pour nous, c'était affilié avec le cégep de Sainte-Foy. Puis c'était les enseignants qui venaient à Wendake, chez nous enseigner. Puis on avait des gens encore de partout, de plusieurs communautés qui étaient avec nous. Encore là, ben, on parlait de notre réalité, on parlait de notre passé, on parlait de tout. Fait qu'on a tous grandi ensemble.
Par rapport au programme comme tel, comment il est conçu, ce qui m'a beaucoup aidé aussi, c'est ça, c'est le support. Le support de l'administration, le support des autres étudiants. C'est plus une ambiance familiale qu'on va retrouver dans cette cohorte-là. On a le support de l'administration, il y a une coordonnatrice du programme qui est toujours présente, là, puis elle est présente souvent dans les cours même. J'ai jamais vu ça ailleurs non plus. C'est ce que ça prenait, moi, pour être capable de me garder accrochée, puis d'avoir quelqu'un qui est aussi impliqué que ça dans le suivi des étudiants, ça nous fait vraiment nous sentir comme un groupe. Les enseignants, ils ont compris que les gens de la cohorte sont là pour échanger de l'information. Puis c'est drôle parce qu'il y a comme une autorégulation qui se fait dans cette cohorte-là. Aussitôt qu'un enseignant est trop rigide, il essaie juste d'aller et de passer son contenu, c'est certain qu'il y a des étudiants qui vont lui dire nous, ce qu'on aime, là, c'est le co-développement, c'est le travail d'équipe. Moi, j'aimerais ça savoir qu'est-ce qu'ils font à Wendake. J'aimerais ça savoir qu'est-ce qu'ils font à Manawan. Là, le prof, il n'a pas le choix d'aller avec le groupe. Puis, je le reconnais, là, pour un enseignant qui n'a jamais été dans ce contexte-là, ça doit être assez difficile.
The dropout rates being so high is because they don't see themselves within the curriculum. So I think in order to reconcile, we need to change the curriculum to have more of an Indigenous perspective, because then that will lead to our students succeeding more often. My dream is to change the curriculum in Ganastage to our own perspective.
Reconciliation in education means integrating Indigenous knowledge whether it be integrating Indigenous methods such as land-based pedagogy, more hands-on learning, and cooperative learning. Because as Indigenous people, we're a collective society. We work together. We work with our hands. Or simply making an effort to hire and include Indigenous people to work for the faculty. Whereas, and by doing that, we can get them to support Indigenous students and help educate the greater society on who we are.
Hello again. Well, I hope you appreciated all these different aspects that raised our ambassadors. As usual, they are really amazing. I think within this short 20 minutes overview, it provides us a lot of points of view and problems that have to be fixed in our different level of education systems. While as premised, now we are pleased to welcome Mrs. Nian Matoush. Hi, Nian. Nian is EU from the community of Mistassini. She's the director of adult education for the Cree School Board. In 2019, Nian initiated the Adult Learning Needs Assessment, a wide-reaching study on community education and employment needs in EU. Each year, over 3,100 EUs participated in surveys and interviews for the Adult Learning Needs Assessment, which will usher in an era of data-driving decision-making for continuing and adult education in the Cree Nation. Nian is passionate about capacity building and Cree-centric education. I will be really interested, Nian, to hear you more about it. And she has participated also in Cree School Board Working Group on the Cree Education Act and Roundtable on Cree Capacity Building. She's recently completed a Master's in Education from the University of Calgary, where her areas of research were, of course, reconciliation and decolonizing education. Thanks for being with us today, Nian. Yours to speak. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the nice introduction. I also want to start just by saying it's a real pleasure and an honor, of course, to be invited to speak here and share a little of how the Cree School Board is really participating actively in this effort to ensure student success. And so as you'll see behind me, I'm in fact in a teepee, not really, but a figurative teepee. And so I'm really inviting each and every one of you to join me in this teepee and just really engage and hopefully learn, some best practices around how to incorporate Cree-centric or Indigenous-centric teaching and learning in your institutions, schools, and so on. So before I launch into the slides I would like to share with you all, I just want to speak a little bit about the Cree School Board and the Cree Nation of Iwishi. This Cree School Board offers youth and adult education and training in 9 communities, which are spread throughout the northern James Bay region of Quebec. The school board, in addition to youth and adult programs and services, it also offers post-secondary funding support to students who generally have to leave their communities to pursue that type of education. The Cree Nation is itself a self-governing nation. It's a right that's protected by the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, including the right to control its own education system entirely. The work of defining the Cree component of Cree education has been ongoing since the establishment of the Cree School Board in 1978. And so bear with me as I share my screen with you all. Great, so I hope you can all see that.
Yeah, it works.
Great. Okay. And so related to the work of the Cree component and defining a philosophy for Cree education, I'd like to add that this work was recently concluded in 2016, in fact. And this led to the creation of a new vision for Cree education, what I call expanding the vision of EU Innu education. In this new definition, the inclusion of what it is we mean by success or student success in general is clearly identified. So students are defined by their self-sufficiency, their resiliency, their confidence, their pride, their cultural identity, citizenship, and then their capacity to function successfully, whether it be within the Cree Nation of Uishi or society. I think the distinction here is really an interesting blend between our cultural roots and sustaining that identity, but also being active and participating in both societies, whether it be our own nation or that of Canadian society. So this definition is important for me to share because it's really the premise for much of the work accomplished by the Cree School Board in its adult sector as well as post-secondary and the support services provided through the post-secondary department at the Cree School Board. And I'll describe a little more on that just later in the presentation. To go back to the adult learning needs assessment that was touched on very briefly in the introduction. My role at the Cree School Board, yes, is to manage the adult sector. When I first stepped into this role, my intent was really to understand, of course, the needs of our adult communities, our adult learners, and almost immediately I realized that there is a dichotomy in adult education and training. And that is, while our programs exist to service labor market needs, usually our students do not have linear training paths. And that's because our students struggle either academically, socially, emotionally, and even financially. So though you would assume adult education and training is a direct path to employment, in fact, it's not. These barriers that I just described really do pull our students in different directions. And so their journey is much more of a mountainous climb than it is a smooth path. Also, we found out that while there are many opportunities currently available in the Cree Nation, such as financing and funding, whether it's in adult education or education just generally, as well as the health sectors, our population is also growing with lots of economic development. In fact, there is a lot of data or lack of data, I should say, to help define the steps required to maximize these conditions when it comes to education, training, and work experiences. So really the intention of this needs assessment was to understand from the community members and the students' perspective what their success factors are or how we can mobilize these success factors, also understanding their challenges, their motivations, all with the intent of really providing better support to our students. So we did conduct a very broad, extensive survey with over 3,000 individuals who participated. These included community-led leaders, former students, potential students within our age, our demographic age, partners, and employers. Really, I think at the core, what we learned is that our students have many wants and needs, yes, but one surprise was really a consistent interest in cultural programs, regardless of the community, regardless of whether you're in a coastal or inland community, which are two distinct communities in the sense that they have different cultural identities as well as a different dialect. However, what was consistent across all 9 communities was a strong interest and motivation to pursue either Cree language, Cree knowledge and skills, or have programming available to them that discusses and immerses the students in their culture and history. So our response to that, this indication that Cree students want cultural programs and in community courses as well, that contribute toward post-secondary graduation. And so our response to that was really to develop these three main areas, which was the decision to provide preparation to post-secondary programming in the community, really analyze as well the potential for a Cree CEGEP and how the Cree School Board could support that effort, and also collaborate with the communities, one community in particular, the Cree Nation of Chesapeake, that had already recognized the need for post-secondary and community, and were making advancements to establish either a Cree CEGEP or provide post-secondary programming in their community. So really our interest has been in improving students' access to post-secondary education, ensuring that they're actually successful at post-secondary, and then ensuring that the school board through our support services, as well as our engagement with the communities, that we're there really to help students transition in and out of post-secondary, understanding that the path is never linear and that our students do need this additional support. So what this has called for is really a seamless academic transition between sectors, access to prerequisite courses, again, in community, particularly in subjects where students are weaker, such as sciences and advanced mathematics, and having access, again, to post-secondary level community courses in the communities. So just a little more on the preparation to post-secondary program. This is one that I'm particularly excited to see, and also excited to announce that we are in fact launching the program this August in collaboration with John Abbott College. In our research, we discovered that students who begin their post-secondary experience in a springboard program actually have better chances of success to those who do not. So therefore, this type of program really fits the needs of students in the USG or the Cree Nation. The program will prepare students both academically as well as personally for the demands of post-secondary education and the potential stressors that we know exist for our students associated with their transition from community-based living to the urban life. So this is a one-year program. It has 2 semesters consisting of credited courses in English, humanities, Cree, French language, physical education, which is entirely land-based, and general education complementaries. In line with the Cree Nation government, the goal of the program is to develop highly educated citizens who are able to move the nation towards self-determination and inspire growth in all sectors of the economy. I think it's also important to share not only, have we structured the program to ensure that we include cultural content as best as possible, but in fact, we were also very careful to ensure that there was a strong partnership that exists with both the community as well as the educational institution. So we're most proud of the fact that the program design is based on a vision of education that highlights the necessity of incorporating local knowledge and community contribution, again, to make the learning more relevant. So across all of these projects, really collaboration and partnership is key. And this is at 2 phases of any type of programs or projects that we embark on. The first phase being the development, and then the second, the delivery. So we were, of course, careful to seek out partners who share that same vision. And as far as the development, not only did we partner with John Abbott College based on that criteria I just mentioned, but we also looked internally within the Cree School Board organization to see who we could collaborate with from the youth sector, as well as professionals from our youth programs department, instructional services department, and the post-secondary services department. As far as the delivery, this will be carried out by John Abbott instructors, but will also include elders and community subject matters who would be invited into the classroom to speak on their expertise around culture. We're also, to complement the teaching, we're also developing a cool toolkit for teachers and providing trainers to make sure that all adaptations that will be needed will be incorporated into the program. And by this, I mean, of course, the local and community adaptations, so since each one is unique in its own way. From that project, the preparatory to post-secondary program, as well as the survey results from the adult learning needs assessment, we discovered, of course, the strong interest in post-secondary and community. And so we looked at, in addition to strictly programming, how else can we promote post-secondary and community? And so this is exactly what you see here on the screen. Is we conducted a thorough analysis of what our aspirations and the goals of a future Cree CEGEP could look like. So this work, in fact, carries over from a study that was done in 1998. It identifies a path for the establishment of Cree CEGEP, which integrates and reinforces the Cree School Board's responsibilities in the areas of preschool, elementary, secondary, adult, and post-secondary education. So the intention is really to, complete the full educational cycle and needs of our students, ensuring their success at school, ensuring that they have access and success in adult education and post-secondary education. So what this has involved for the school board is really this extensive, as I mentioned, research, but analysis, which is about defining the direction for post-secondary and community. And so we were able to identify best practices in three main areas: governance, quality assurance, ensuring the delivery of Cree-centric programs, and then really looking at, outside of having physical brick and mortar buildings in our communities, how else could we connect the communities to post-secondary? The logical conclusion there was to leverage the infrastructures that we already have, both in terms of facilities, so physical buildings, but also the building off of the strength of our IT department, and fortunately, using those existing delivery models that we have already been able to introduce in this past year because of COVID. So we do have a little practice there that we can build off. So just looking again, I'll just elaborate very briefly on what we mean by governance and quality assurance. Here we have agreed as a school board organization and even as a nation that Cree control of education is a fundamental to the creation of a Cree CEGEP. The benefits of this control, of course, include language revitalization, cultural sovereignty, improved student outcomes, and improved community well-being. An important aspect here worth mentioning, I believe, is in community involvement. What we mean by that and how we've defined it as far as our direction for post-secondary is the inclusion of elders or knowledge keepers in our governance. So not just in our classrooms as far as, our pedagogical approach or teaching and learning, but really in the entire governance of the CEGEP. For example, this might be the creation of an elder council, or having an elder advise or fill an advisory capacity in the different boards, councils, or committees that may be associated with running the future Cree CEGEP. We also talk about regular communication with the surrounding community. This is already a practice that's well ingrained in the Cree School Board. This concept of community and working in partnership with community is really tantamount to everything that we do at the school board. So this is another way of how we would ensure community involvement. As far as Cree-centric programs, I'll mention two here in a little detail. It is the intention of the Cree School Board to ensure that we follow a holistic approach. So that means programs themselves do have to represent a holistic approach, which engages the individual in a comprehensive manner, and of course includes, the four main facets of everyone's being. So that is the emotional, spiritual, and intellectual. and emphasizes the relationship between the learner, the program, and the community in this kind of more interconnected mindset. That marries very well with the Cree component of Cree education, or the Cree philosophy for Cree education. As well, as far as our programs and curriculum, here too we invite the participation of communities and elders. We emphasize community consultation as being necessary in developing curriculum and programs. Again, this is something that is common practice at the Cree School Board today, but what we're looking for is really building a new post-secondary program or service entirely, and so having the involvement of community and elder from the very early stages of building curriculum and programs will be imperative. And then finally, just a mention about how I believe the intention of the school board is really to reinforce this idea of two worlds. So acknowledging and also having a strategy to address the two worlds. And by the two worlds, we mean that our learners, our students, our community members are really participating not only in, all of those activities related to building and enforcing their cultural identity, but they're also preparing for a future where we want them to excel at. And this is what we would call the Mandel world, or the society at large, or the equivalent of society. So really we're interested in outfitting them both with their strong cultural practice, as well as having the ability and the skills and the knowledge to participate in society. And then finally, we look at our online distance education program. We're building off of a current infrastructure that I mentioned previously, but we're also looking at making sure that our teachers, as well as our partners, have the digital literacy and media aptitude to be able to maximize the use of the infrastructure we have currently. Another very important element that we're introducing, I should make the distinction, while the Cree CEGEP project is in development, we have been able to introduce measures and different strategies into our current practice, both in adult education and even in post-secondary. And what you see here, the Cree-centric teaching and learning framework, is an example of that practice, of how we're not, simply setting future objectives that would, include and promote this cultural component. In fact, we're doing that work right now. And so the Cree-centric teaching and learning framework is really intended to enable inspired teaching and valued learning across the Cree School Board in both its adult and post-secondary education offerings. I think what's unique about this framework is it represents a shift away from the current culturally incompatible Western model of education to an educational model that is steeped in Cree ways of learning and knowing, and that fosters student empowerment, well-being, and achievement. This framework will achieve its overall objectives by providing clear definitions of student success, preparing teachers to support Cree students in a culturally relevant way, aligning the curriculum with Cree-centric materials, and establishing clear expectations, values, and shared concepts. And a key part of this framework, of course, is teacher training. So the exciting news here, again, for me, especially as an employee of the school board and as a person who's leading this initiative, is the fact that we'll be introducing this framework come this August, along with teacher training. And so finally, I just wanted to describe to you our work in promoting post-secondary, as well as, again, coming back to this idea of the importance of engaging with community through community partnership and through community consultation as well. And so in our adult learning needs assessment, when we surveyed members of the Cree Nation of Chisasibi, they did in fact respond very highly and and favorably to post-secondary education. So not only did 85% of respondents say that they would consider going back to school, but as you can see, 32% of those respondents said that they're very interested in post-secondary education and even pursuing their secondary school diploma, which we know is the pathway to post-secondary education. And so in addition to that, what we learned is that education generally is very important to community members, where 99% of the community members agreed that education has an impact and is ultimately necessary for the growth of the community. So looking at all of the work that I just described earlier and leading into this project, this really gives you a community perspective, I believe, of how we can work with community to kind of promote educational initiatives and projects. Sorry, just lost my page. Okay. So just a little bit more about our collaboration with the Cree Nation of Chesapeake in our work through a main working group, as well as sharing data. The community themselves did poll their community members as well to understand what their particular needs and challenges were. We were able to complement their data together with the adult learning needs assessment, and we've been able to come to what I've described as 3 keys to post-secondary collaboration, which really kind of sets the tone as well as provides our collaboration a sort of framework, if you will. And so what we've been able to realize in all of this work is the importance of valuing the uniqueness of each community. And within that, the role of the Cree School Board is to enable the community to reach its post-secondary goals by providing governance structure and pedagogical support. So we're not necessarily there to lead any initiative. We are there, however, to ensure that we collaborate, partner, and support. We are also supporting the Cree Nation of Chesapeake by building on our existing structures, as well as our existing structures, including governance. By governance, I can define these as our policy governance, our council governance, our strategic action plans, and all the documents, processes, and approaches, pedagogical approaches that complement our current governance structure. So all of these can be applied to a future Cree CEGEP. And finally, we have discussed at length the ways in which we can share resources and services. One main example is the fact that the Cree School Board has been able to guarantee funding for adults learning centers in nearly all of the communities. We have agreed to prioritize the Cree Nation of Chesapeake, modify the plans for that facility to ensure the inclusion in the space of post-secondary courses and programs in the future once the construction is ready. So I think just in conclusion, I did want to share how all of the data, the research and the analysis that we've embarked on in the past few years has really led us to a state of rethinking teaching and learning in the context of Cree education. Not only are we really forging closer ties with communities in this new pedagogical approach, a new way of delivering education, but we're also making sure that we have the frameworks and the structures to support that and to support communities as well. In all of this work, I believe the Cree control of Cree education is fundamental. That always remains and will remain. And again, as I mentioned previously, the benefits of this control is really related to how we're able to maintain our language and culture, ensure the position of both of these, ensuring our cultural sovereignty, improving student outcomes and community well-being as well. And in all this work, we're realizing how important it is to adapt to change. because even as a Cree nation intent on Cree control of Cree education, we're realizing every community has its own needs. And so we have to be able to adapt and respond to those needs and be able to engage with communities at all the different phases of any one of these initiatives, whether it be, post-secondary programming or just a simple inclusion of more culture and language into the curriculum. Just as a final point, I think my main takeaway has been the observation of how interconnected we are, regardless of which sector you may represent. If it's the youth sector, post-secondary, or adult sector, I think what we need to steer away from is looking at each one as separate. In fact, each is interconnected. And so I believe that having an education model supported by a structure that looks at each one of these and engaging with students from that perspective is really ensure the success of our students. So my apologies if I rushed through that. It was quite a bit of information, but I'm happy to take questions.
Wow. Honestly, I'm sure I'm not alone to be really impressed. I think would be many today that like to listen to you more and spend at least another hour so you can go deeper. And well, every single slides you presented, it was so interesting. Thank you so much, Mrs. Matoush. That's super interesting. And I, indeed, you took a bit, few more minutes than what was the, but don't worry, it was just wonderful. But unfortunately, I think we will have to just keep going on our next guest. But I wouldn't be surprised if some of our participants contact you in the next days or months. Anyway, congratulations for these different initiatives you've been in the last years, and good luck for this new CEGEP project upcoming. I'm sure with this approach and really clear indigenized methodology, you will meet great success. Well, thanks again for being with us today, Mrs. Matoush. Donc voilà, si vous permettez, donc je remercie.
So if you allow, obviously, I would like to thank Mrs. Matoush for the quality of her presentation. With time flying by, if you will, I propose that we continue with our next speaker, who is a member of the Cree community of Muskeg Lake. She is main director of the Indigenous office at Concordia University. And so Manon Tremblay, she was the director for Indigenous research at the Human Resources Research Council. She also was in charge of the project for the Indigenous Expertise Office. She worked for programs and strategic services as well. She dedicated 20 years of her career as manager at the university. She was also associate professor at Concordia and also at University of Ottawa. So Madame Tremblay, good afternoon, and thank you for being there with us today. A very impressive experience. So the microphone is yours. Thank you, Alexandre. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having invited me to talk about decolonization. What I am presenting today is part of a workshop on reconciliation, decolonization, and the indigenization in post-secondary. This is a workshop that I offer at Concordia and that has become so popular that since January, it's been about 20 times that I've been giving this workshop, but obviously it's a workshop that is much longer. So I will provide you with the highlights only. Originally, I created this to help the participants to better understand the issues regarding colonization. or related to colonization. But we can't talk about decolonization without talking about colonialism. Colonialism is anchored in the belief of a superiority that is racial, cultural, and religious. A superiority that finally justifies the political, cultural pressure and discrimination towards Indigenous people. This affected the behavior, the reflections, and the actions of the majority of Indigenous people. Very often, they don't see anything wrong because they identify themselves with colonial activities. And some of them even want to preserve these values, but the majority of people, they don't see why they would have to protect colonialist systems. When we are members, colonialism is very visible. These values are the ones with which we were raised. But in the working environment, colonialism continues to exist in policies and in the systems. As we see the business models, the human resources models, the best way to operate, the best way to produce goods and services is with the employees. So in classrooms, colonialism is part of the curriculum and the pedagogical practices. So colonialism dictates the perspectives that are taught and privileged before any others. Colonialism ignores or minimizes Indigenous peoples and their history, their contribution to Canadian society. This colonialism comes from our cultures, our language, and our knowledge. And our elements are either anecdotal or anthropological, but aren't worth teaching. Colonialism finally allows not only a teaching that is biased, but also contributes to encourage conversations in classrooms between students that are misinformed and that take on even racist proportions. Colonialism in the classrooms makes each Indigenous student invisible and muzzles them, and especially just relegates them to their territory. Attitudes and colonial attitudes and behaviors also affects relationships between teachers and students. Their marks, access to programs and services that are so important for academic success. And these attitudes finally contribute the most to students dropping out or failing. So colonial systems still contribute to alienation of students, employees, and also Indigenous faculty. There is a huge lack of opportunity when we compare ourselves to the colonial model that persists in post-secondary. There is no attention paid to the diverse perspectives and to what Indigenous communities have experienced. We also miss an opportunity to think outside the box, to analyze older systems that finally don't work for anybody. And we're also lacking in the opportunity of introducing new ways of doing things, new ways of teaching, new ways of learning. We are lacking the opportunity, we miss the opportunity to address models that reinforce obstacles and barriers to retention of students, of teachers, of employees that are Indigenous. And we also contribute to encourage an institutional climate that encourages the population with regards to discriminatory actions towards Indigenous people. The population, this has become endemic. This is a behavior that is encouraged by the employees that prefer working with people who think and behave as they do, because it keeps their comfort level intact, but it also opens the door to people who are not recognized by our community. Now that we have talked about colonialism, we'll look at reconciliation. Now, obviously, the concept of reconciliation is not new, but it's a concept that causes a lot of preoccupations with Indigenous people. As we know, many of us believe that the concept is completely deficient because there was never conciliation. So how can you reconcile if we were never really friends anyway? For post-secondary, it's funny how a term like reconciliation can become insignificant. People start with the best of intentions, but it's like everybody starts to, want to tug, it's like a tug of war. Who wants to dictate the terms of reconciliation? And this is also a colonialist manifestation. What can we do to fail in reconciliation in post-sec? Well, that's pretty easy. First of all, we put the wrong people in charge of the initiative of an important project that will have a direct impact on the student lives. And then we'll approach it from we'll summarize it and approach it in a very we rely on 1 or 2 employees to say everything we want to know about all of the Indigenous people across the country. And then we put our students, our employees, and our teachers who are Indigenous in symbolic situations and positions without real opportunity or responsibilities. We put we'll wonder how much all this will cost. And we start cutting corners. And then we start diluting our actions so that we can meet our budgetary expectations, but also we need to preserve our comfort level. We don't think about the real impact on Indigenous people, and we put a lot of emphasis on initiatives that especially serve to improve the image of the institution rather than have real initiatives that will bring positive impact for Indigenous people. In summary, that is what reconciliation is. Now talk about decolonization. In post-secondary, reconciliation refers to a process that attacks the system and schools of thought that persist in our institutions, that will dictate how the university is managed, how the classes are taught, and how students are treated. This will expose obstacles, inequalities, and systemic racism that continues to have an impact on academic success and also employment satisfaction. Decolonization will look at the relationship between the university and its donors and other stakeholders, and will also look at the colonial research practices that still exist. But there are obstacles. Decolonization is not easy. And it's not a process that is an end in itself. It's not something that will ever be completed. There are too many people that will continue to resist because they don't believe that decolonization applies to them, or they want to continue to keep values and negative beliefs about Indigenous people. But we can't let ourselves be discouraged. There's still a lot of work to be done, and we'll never be able to convert everybody. We need to ensure that decolonization remains a priority. Here's what Concordia put into place. First of all, we submitted an Indigenous Directions Action Plan containing more than 40 recommendations to decolonize Concordia and provide a welcoming space for our students. We have the unconditional support and the engagement and the active participation of our president and of our vice presidents. And this sends a very powerful message to the rest of the university. We created a governance council, Indigenous Directions Leader. And that provides advice to all of the university on Indigenous issues. We created high management positions that provides Indigenous people with decision-making positions. And there are communication lines that are direct with the president. We created an office. Je suis désolée, c'est instable un petit peu. We wanted to decolonize the content of the courses as well. A series of professional development workshops dealing with issues for Indigenous people and talks about the challenge of working with Indigenous students in the university. We implemented policies on equal and just compensation for Indigenous students and others. And we're drafting up a policy right now with regards to students and hires, employees. But decolonization is a problem too. Decolonization will be a failure if universities don't engage with the Indigenous community in a respectful way, in a real way, and in a continuous way. Many post-sec institutions have advisory councils, etc. But another manifestation of colonialism is to reserve the right to be a part of those councils. When we start to decolonize the university, we need to be careful that we don't protect the aspects of the work of the administration and university as if they don't need decolonization. It's not only certain courses that need to be decolonized, it's the university as a whole. For example, to put more effort in decolonizing courses and curricula, but to continue to have relationships with corporations and societies whose activities destroy Indigenous territory, traditional and ancestral, for example. And finally, to put pressure on Indigenous people to join to gather their voices with other marginal peoples, well, even though their experience and their agendas might be different. We have a tendency to minimize issues that don't seem to be important. So what does indigenization have to do with all this? That's the last piece of the puzzle. Decolonization and indigenization will not completely take down the existing systems. We are simply trying to redress inequalities and not have to do with models that don't work for us and have a direct impact on academic success, and also with regards to campus life. Decolonization will look at systems, structures, and attitudes that exist in the university settings. Indigenization is the change that must take place to deal with these inequalities. So indigenization adds value and takes down barriers. Indigenization is not to offer preferential treatment or a backdoor. It's to institute models that guarantee fair access with the same rights and privileges available to the rest of Canadian society. But here again, indigenization, there are problems. The biggest obstacle, the last bastion of colonialization, because of university's heritage or tradition, or again, so that we don't upset some people. Another major obstacle is not to allocate enough resources, financial or human, so that these projects can be achieved successfully. Another important obstacle, as we know, the unequal burden that we put on Indigenous employees and staff and teachers, where their tasks and responsibilities are multiple. They have to wear many hats at the same time on many other Indigenous issues. Active resistance on behalf of the teachers, employees, students, unions as well that don't want to change collective agreements. As we said earlier, superficial actions don't change anything. Systemic racism, and in closing, the lack of awareness, respect, and confidence toward Indigenous people. I will stop here. I would like to thank you for having listened to me. I'm looking forward to listening to your comments and questions. Thank you very much, Mrs. Tremblay. And wow, what a summary here. We feel that you are quite used to shaking things up in the institutions, and the dangers with regards to reconciliation. These are numerous in the institutions. Thank you so much for this portrait that you have presented us. We have time for a few questions. I would like to remind you, if you would like to provide or ask questions, You have the Q and R to ask questions, or Q&A rather, in English. And don't hesitate to send those into our discussion. In the meantime, you mentioned among the many challenges how to maintain a respectful, continuous, and authentic relationship between university administration, teachers, employees, and Indigenous students. And how could this relationship be maintained and reinforced over time due to the fact that for many communities, they are very much solicited by all of the institutions. And I also wanted that to link that to another question that has just been asked as well, which has to do with governance. So you have internal governance within the institution, Concordia. Is there room in this governance council for the members of the community? So for now, the governance council, its composition is teachers, staff members, and Indigenous students who are representatives of their communities. But for engagement or community mobilization, one of the things that we do is that our action plan, for example, is not static. It must be reopened periodically so that we can ensure that it always meets the expectations, the needs, and the priorities of the community. So when we reopen, and we're doing that right now, we go back to the community to ensure that our recommendations, we propose that the recommendations we make sure that they're still current. We make sure that we haven't missed anything the first time we came up with our action plan. And yes, there were some elements that were brought. I think it was at least 10 elements that were brought by communities, and we added to our action plan. The members of our governance committee always goes back. They always go back to their communities to consult them, to present different issues and ask them for their advice and counsel. And we always listen to students in everything we do. Right now, we're working on a plan for a building dedicated to Indigenous people at the university. We have small offices right and left, different Indigenous units that we would like to bring together under the same roof. Of course, we would be ready to engage in a consultation that would be more extensive with the community in the university and outside the university, because we want to know, we know what we want in this building, but we want to know what the communities want to see in this building as well. It's not up to us to decide. We're there to work with the community. Well, if you allow, I'll ask you to answer in 1 or 2 minutes for the next question with the time that we have left. 3 questions came in the same minute here. When you talk about the community, does this have to do with the university community members? Yes, that are Indigenous, yes. We suggest that you listen to Indigenous people in our courses, but sometimes they can feel pressure maybe because they are so few and they might not want to be volunteers this way. How can we reflect on this dilemma? And it comes back to what I was saying at the start, where even within the communities, councils are very much solicited. So I'll go on with the last question as well. Maybe you can answer both at the same time. Mr. Jean-Sébastien says decolonization in the CEGEPs, a bit different from the universities who have more independence and autonomy. What do we do with distinct courses in the CEGEPs that are drafted because of ministerial directives? So these remain institutions that have different issues and questions to deal with. In 2 minutes, you want this in 2 minutes. This is a challenge. Yes, 2 minutes. I'm asking you anyway. Yes. So for the question of speakers, outside speakers in the courses, what we try to do, one of the messages that we try to give to the community at Concordia is that those that are high profile are not the only people who have knowledge, who have know-how. There are many other Indigenous people who have a whole bunch of things to contribute. And we will help them to find people who have these expertise and knowledge. And they're not necessarily high-profile people who are solicited as much as others. This is one of the things that we do. As for decolonization in the CEGEPs, that could be a problem, yes. But in universities, I can compare this problem to a problem of academic freedom. Some professors will say, you can't tell me what to do or what to say because of academic freedom. But there are many ways we can decolonize. And one of the things that we're trying to do right now is to provide training to the professors to get rid of inappropriate conversations that can happen between students in classrooms. When a professor presents an Indigenous curriculum and all of a sudden somebody in the classroom says something that is really inopportune and even racist, what do we do to stop that right away? Because we realized that, because there were complaints, that professors don't seem to be, not all of them anyway, don't seem to be equipped to put an end to those kinds of conversations, or at least direct them in a more respectful fashion. So to decolonize, that's part of it. Decolonization, some people think that it's a huge work, but in some courses, there's very little to be done. Very little that needs, and very little to be done, where for others, there's a lot of work to be done. So it's case by case. Congratulations. Many things to do. This is interesting to see how even on a daily basis, when there is no First Nations person even present somewhere, how this can rest on all citizens' shoulders to denounce intolerance and all forms of racism and discrimination. This is very interesting. Thank you. I would like to mention that in our window of discussions, conversations, Mrs. Riando, who is with our technical team, there is a hyperlink to the Concordia Action Plan, Indigenous Action Plan, so you can have a look at that. Thank you very much, Manon Tremblay. Thank you for having shared with us today, and it'll be a pleasure to see you again in other circumstances, because even in September's forum. And look, our fourth webinar is already coming to an end. Maybe just to bring to your attention, since we're talking about governance, that the fifth one will be on this issue of leverage with regards to the role and the place of First Nations peoples in our governance and institutions. A very good topic coming up with everything that has to do with the decisional process. I'm impatient to hear what will be shared. I would also like to mention, as we indicated during our last webinars, there is, we are taking advantage of your presence here for this exercise of collective intelligence, identify resources, solutions. The link is here in our chat, our discussion. We've just added the link towards Padlet. If you can look at that and see what was added since our last meeting. So you will find there ideas that you might like to call upon that could be profitable to you. And finally, I would like to thank Mrs. Nian Matoush, Madame Tremblay, thank you for sharing your experiences, your expertise, your knowledge. This was fantastic. We could have listened to you for a long time, as indicated also in this discussion window. The recording of this webinar, as for the others, will be available on the National Building Reconciliation Forum website soon. The address is there. And obviously, I always would like to thank our coordination team that works so hard to make sure that everything works well. Marie-Josée Fortin, Evelyne Rondeau, Michel Noral, and obviously thank you to our interpreters that do. They are invisible, but we can hear them. Thank you, Carol. I don't see her. Here I am. Thank you. And thank you also to André Desrosiers. And maybe to close, as you know, we like to have our closing prayer. Madame, is it our closing prayer? Yes, Madame Picard, if you would like to go for these last remarks. Thank you.
After this break, we will take our respective paths back to our respective environments and our workplaces with our responsibilities. We're energized by the testimonials of our ambassadors, the expertise, and the sense of commitment of the speakers. Everything that was prepared by such a great team. At the beginning of the capsule, Édith Bélanger was saying that it was so the time that we spend together is so precious. We go back to our respective homes and to our colleagues. We had the time to welcome these words, and I propose that we think of Elizabeth and her loved ones and to support each other. So let's give thanks for this wonderful meeting that brings us together. So we'll see you next time. Take care. And with the prayer that accompanies us, and our other elder, Elizabeth Ashini, is with her loved ones now in a time of need. So thank you for being with us for this fourth webinar. So our next seminar will be June 3rd, Aboriginal Indigenous Governance and Education. So we look forward to seeing you again on June 3rd. Thank you.
Bonjour, bye bye Alexandre. D'accord, bye bye. Et merci. Et je veux dire merci à André de m'avoir ramassé parce que l'électricité a complètement manqué ici. Alors merci à André s'il est encore là.